Welcome to everybody to this third launch of Not Dead Yet. I'm Susan Hawthorne, and I would just like to welcome you again because I'm reading my notes. Okay, so before we begin, I would like to do our traditional welcome to country. We respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship of the lands and waterways. The lands on which Spinifex offices are situated are Jiru, Bunurong, Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Eora and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. So I'm going to begin by asking Renata to say something about Not Dead Yet and why we did it.
Yes, thank you, and hello everybody. And why did we do Not Dead Yet? Well, it's a project that has been in the making for quite a few years, because as I'm sure all of you would agree, that so often we hear that old women are belittled or not, taken seriously, or like just the other day we had a radio talk on feminist economics and that women were being erased, and we thought, great, excellent, that's really wonderful that somebody's talking about this. Well, this talk did not seem to know any of the work of Prue Hyman, for instance, or Marilyn Waring, just nothing. And I mean, it's the same all over. Like I've just started to read the new book on trans by Helen Joyce. It does not mention Janice Raymond. It does not mention Sheila Jeffreys. It does not mention actually any of the feminist work that's been going. It's kind of like we are just, again, totally invisible. So that was really the first motivation why we said, hey, out there, we are not dead yet. And then the other motivation to write this book is to say we have to get young women reading this book and actually find out what we did, all of us in the 60s and 70s. And obviously, clearly, the 56 women in this book is just a snapshot of many, many other women that we could have included. But it's a fantastic cross section. And so you want to say a bit more about how we did it to get these women into this book?
Well, we racked our brains, we searched our email addresses, we did all sorts of things to do that. And then we got some people wrong because they were 6 months or a year or whatever younger than we thought they were. And I turned out to be 4 months too young, so I'm not in the book, apart from writing the intro, half of the intro. And so we did miss some people because we didn't realise what their ages were, which is hard. But what we did was we went through, women responded so fast. We had some contributions within a couple of weeks of putting out the call. We only had 1 or 2 women who decided not to contribute. That was very sad, but nevertheless, more kept coming out of the woodwork, so we kept going. Then we had to write an introduction. So I started that process trying to put together all the different women writing different subject areas, and then I gave it to Renata, and she improved it and added new, much more friendly kinds of things in the intro. And so we really felt that we had become a good team. Even after 30 years of working together, we know that we can co-write things. I can't remember now which bits I wrote and which bits she wrote. And we're really thrilled with the book. We enjoyed reading the contributions that were sent in. We're absolutely thrilled with what came in, and it's been terrifying and fabulous to be able to have these 3 anthologies these 3 group launches, I mean, because of the damn time zones, but nerve-wracking as well. So I've learned more about Zoom in the last 3 weeks than I ever thought I would know. And so, Renata, anything else you want to add?
No, just to say that I think so far from the reactions that we've had, it seems to be working, that young women are totally perplexed when they read this book. And as one woman said to Cherise Krameray, who's in the book, we had just no idea what you all did. And I mean, that is one really, really good point. Susan and I did a couple of radio interviews with very nice, young, respectful women interviewers, and it was all the same thing. So let's just hope it will continue like that, because it could be a very wonderful resource for young women to actually really find out what feminism is, what women's liberation is, and that it is not liberal feminism. So far, so very good. I mean, we've had very good responses.
Okay, so then I'll just tell you the order of speakers so that everybody knows. So we'll begin with Sheila Jeffreys, Lynne Harne, Consuelo Rivera Fuentes, Lynda Birke, Alison Laurie, Elaine Hutton, and Linda Bellos. And so before each speaker, I'm introducing them with a short bio. So here we go. Sheila Jeffreys is a radical feminist activist who has worked against male violence and for lesbian feminism since she joined the women's liberation movement in 1973 and became a lesbian in 1977. She lived in Australia from 1991 until 2015, where she taught at the University of Melbourne. She's the author of 11 books, the most recent of which is Trigger Warning, My Lesbian Feminist Life, published by Spinifex in 2020. Sheila, over to you.
Yes, so it is lovely at last to be able to speak to you, and it's great to see so many women I know in this lineup, and it's marvelous to talk to you, I have to say. So about Not Dead Yet, the book is it's a marvelous and a fascinating book, I think, and I'm terribly glad that Spinifex produced it, and because it's a possible and necessary book now, because there's a new feminist movement, and all of the women in the book were involved in the women's liberation movement, which was the last time there was a powerful feminist movement, and we all suffered the grief of seeing so much of what we created destroyed. As Lynn said, we lost our bookstores, our women's centres, our publishers, our bands, our discos, our conferences, our organisations, our meetings. We lost all the places in which we found community, lovers, friends, and we created our own culture and our own cultural reference at that time. For instance, probably not many people now know that some lesbian feminists in London used the word giraffe to refer to ourselves, because we were an endangered species and because we stuck our necks out. And also, of course, giraffes are lovely. I mean, that's just an extra. So we had giraffe badges, we had giraffe pictures on our walls. I have one on the wall in this room I'm in now. And it meant we were able to chat on the train about the giraffe history group, for instance, without getting unwanted attention from men. It was great. But the culture we created at that time, it was huge, it was inventive, it was comforting, and we lost all of that almost entirely. But we are still here, and now a new wave of feminism is rising. And I had pretty much lost hope that feminism would rise again in the dark days of the 2000s, but it is rising. And I, like many of the women in Not Dead Yet, are involved in feminist and lesbian feminist activism and community making all over again. And it's gripping for me now to be able to compare what's happening now with what we had before. And that's what I write about in Not Dead Yet. And one difference, for instance, is simply that the new movement is intergenerational, which this book shows. And there are many of us old feminists involved in this new wave. And we're able to use our experience and our energies in retirement to take part in activism, to give advice, to to create as much as we can a sense of continuity and renew community and history. This was not possible in the previous movement in the 60s and 70s, because back then the vast majority of newly minted feminists were in our 20s and 30s. We didn't know, and we never found our four sisters. The new movement is fully stocked with women from their 20s to their 80s, and all the better for that. And another positive is that the women becoming involved today have a wonderful skill base and more influence, because they are practicing lawyers, architects, academics, journalists, doctors. Back then, we were all teachers or librarians. That was it for women, pretty much. And we were not integrated into the society in the way that we are now. So I think that's one reason why the women who are becoming feminists today are particularly furious, because they thought they'd got there. A lot of them, you know, they were doing very well, and then suddenly discovered that the sexual fetishists, the transvestites, were erasing them. And that was a big, big shock. I think it was not quite as much of a shock to those of us who are old. But there are some aspects of this new movement that do not compare favorably with what we had then. For instance, back then, women's communications took place in newsletters and journals that we created ourselves, controlled ourselves, and we could develop our ideas without any interference with men. Now it's all on platforms, or almost all, on platforms controlled by men, and they're doxing us, throwing us off, expelling us, and completely in control of what we're able to do. It's a very, very strange situation for women.
Yeah. Lynda, hopefully a picture will come. I don't know, but I'm there.
Lynda, can you mute yourself, please? Lynda Bellos has just joined us, but Lynda,
great. Okay. Another difference is that men weren't interested in the women's liberation movement at the time, and all of our meetings, marches, and so on were women only, and men didn't protest. They didn't engage in violence against us, and they do now. At that time, they didn't care at all. Now it's very different, because men are organized in numerous online communities, which are loosely known as the manosphere, in which they incite each other to greater and greater hatred of women, and plot together not just to attack feminists, but to engage in mass murder, as the incel did in Plymouth in the UK just a few days ago. He started with the murder of his mother and then killed others. And the hatred and the organization of this men is on a quite different scale today, and our struggle has to be on a different scale too. Thank goodness we have so many wonderfully skilled women out there. For me, and I'm sure for many of my sisters who are in Not Dead Yet, the revival of feminism is a wonder. It suggests that our struggle was not in vain, and it gives us a whole new project for our old age. Sisterhood is alive, it's getting stronger by the day, and the new feminist movement is more international than the one I was in the UK back in the day. I'm meeting wonderful feminists and lesbian feminists across the globe through the Women's Human Rights Campaign and the delights of Zoom networking, and I feel in community again, but this time it extends to Spain, Mexico, Korea, all over the globe. I feel extremely lucky to have been involved in 2 waves of feminism. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sheila. That is wonderful. And you're absolutely right. Being at both ends is a terrific thing. Lynne Harne has been a women's liberationist and lesbian feminist activist since the early 1970s. She's taught women's studies and worked with the London Lesbian History Group, most recently as a founding member of the Lesbian Rights Alliance to defend lesbian rights and challenge transgender ideology. In summer, she participates in picnics and swimming at the ladies' pool at Hampstead Heath. And later this year, actually, Spinifex is doing a book about the ladies' or pool in the women's pool in Sydney, in Coogee. So, Lynne, over to you.
Right. I just want to say that as in your introduction, really, I took the invitation to write about our experience of women's liberation very literally, and really basically wrote about my experience because, as you pointed out, very few younger women even know that women's liberation existed. And we've literally, in many ways, been wiped off the map by, the current patriarchy, and wiped off the map in terms of academia and so forth. So it did seem very important to spell out to outline what we did and show really what was possible. But in many ways, there are very similar situations from then to now. Only now is much worse, and it's like we're living in a dystopian nightmare because of the transgender lobby's attempts to erase women and lesbians altogether. So anyway, I'll go through some of what I feel was the important things that I've said, and in terms of my experience, I mean, I joined the women's liberation movement in 1971. I'd actually seen a demonstration on television, and it still shows the power of the mass media in a way, because I probably wouldn't have known about it until later if I hadn't seen that women's liberation demonstration. And in that demonstration, there was a sort of theatre group who were ironically singing "Stay Young and Beautiful if you want to be loved," and we can see the relevance to that now as well, because beauty myths are still predominant, and even as old women, we're still expected to beautify ourselves, if you like, to make ourselves look younger, although a lot of us haven't bothered and have resisted that. After that, I also met up with women from who'd been part of, in 1970, there was a protest against the Miss World contest, and where women had gone into the Miss World venue where it was happening, and it was being run by Bob Hope, and thrown flower bombs and things at the stage and tried to totally disrupt the event. And at that point, they said, this is what they said, and this is from the book: "We have been in the Miss World context all our lives, judging ourselves as the judges, living to please men, dividing other women into safe friends and attractive rivals. Graded, degraded, humiliated. We've seen through it. We're not beautiful, we're not ugly, we're angry." And that, I suppose, the Miss World context really started the huge movement. Again, women just being treated as sex objects to be available to please and service men, basically. And then following that, and that included later in the 1970s, resistance to the legalization of pornography and pawn shops, and a new a movement of angry women to actually take direct action against that. And that was another thing that I was involved in the early 1980s, which led on from that. The other aspect of it was that many of us became lesbians in the women's liberation movement, and certainly by 1972 I'd become a lesbian and moved into a lesbian feminist collective in Hackney. It was a squat, and we shared everything from childcare to clothes, etc. And being lesbian, it was very much centering women, and being what the radical lesbians in the US called being women identified women. I mean, it was also rejecting compulsory femininity, which is again what radical lesbians in the States prioritized in order to be a woman identified woman. And sex roles, rejecting the feminine sex role, the passive sex role that women were supposed to be able to, you know, were actually expected to take in relation to men. We also tried in that collective to bring up our girl children to also reject those sex roles. So we tried to bring them up as strong, independent women. Moving on, though, I suppose to the late night, we had, as I'm sure Sheila will also talk about, we built a lesbian feminist culture and created our own bookshops, published books, had women's presses, had women's bands and so on. So we did have a feminist and lesbian culture which existed right up until really the end of the 1980s. But the 1980s began to see resistance to feminism from the queer movement, initially the lesbian and gay movement, the joint lesbian gay movement, and young lesbians identifying themselves much more with gay men. It was also the time of AIDS and so on. And basically, and in the academy sort of spoke post-structuralism, etc. So basically, by the 1990s, women's movement had been largely erased, and we did write a book called All the Rage, which is now out of print, and Spinifex is republishing for us, because it actually sets the background to that. Just to say a bit about the present, I mean, it is really, we're up against so much. I mean, there is a women's movement, if you like, that is organising against it. And it is centering women, because it is women and girls specifically that they're trying to wipe out. But also, I mean, as I'm a lesbian mother and a lesbian grandmother, and I've got two granddaughters of school age, and knowing what's going on at the coalface, if you like, is what's happening in schools. I mean, we recently had the Scottish government saying that children can change their gender at the age of 4, and giving guidance to schools about that. But it's not only about children changing their sex and so on. Yeah, it's also about, with this movement, has been the promotion of pornography. Pornography is even promoted in schools by these trans private companies that go in and say, we can teach you about LGBT equality. Pornography, anal sex as an acceptable form, a normalized form of sex for girls. Girls must accept this. Kink. They are promoting all these sexual abuses of girls, if you like, which is not being combated or not being resisted by our politicians. And our politicians absolutely refuse to recognise that all this harm is going on, and prefer to support something which is up to date, trendy, the new progressive movement, and denying what is happening to women and girls. So really what we're up against is very, very hard at the moment, and all state organisations have been captured by the trans movement. And yeah,
I think that we'll probably have to stop, because it's already more than 5 minutes.
Yes, okay, so I'll stop there.
Our next speaker is Consuelo Rivera Fuentes. So Consuelo, you should unmute yourself now. Consuelo is a Latin American political prisoner and a lesbian sociologist, a writer, and a feminist editor. In 2017, she created Victorina Press, which now has a string of awards, and you should look them up on their website. She has several poetry books, among them La Liberación de la Eva Descarada and Arena en la Garganta, both of which were published in Chile. So Consuelo, and after Consuelo has spoken, I'm going to play a video.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Spinifex Press. That includes, of course, Renate and Susan for inviting us to contribute to Not Dead Yet. The song you will hear is dedicated to all women, and it is an exhortation in a way to resist, to continue to resist, and to ignore those silly things that they say about us women to keep us submissive. So over to you, Susan.
Okay, so I have to share the screen, and I'm hoping this works really well. Okay. All right.
Mujer, si te han crecido las ideas de ti, van a decir cosas muy feas, que no eres buena, que si tal cosa, que cuando callas es mucho más hermosa. Mujer, espiga abierta entre pañales, cadena de eslabones ancestrales, ovario fuerte, di lo que vales. La vida empieza donde todos son iguales. Ángela Jane, o antes Manuela, mañana es tarde y el tiempo apremia. Mujer, semilla, fruto, flor, camino. Pensar es altamente femenino. Cuando no quieras ser incubadora, dirán, no sirven estas mujeres de ahora.
Fantastic. Thank you, Consuelo.
Thank
That
you,
was wonderful.
Consuelo.
Bravo!
Very good.
Consuelo, do you want to say anything more before we move on to Lynda Birke?
No, not at the moment, only that I am not dead yet.
Okay, all right. So Lynda Birke, unmute yourself while I read out your note. Okay, Lynda Birke is a lesbian feminist and European. As an academic, she focused for many years on women's studies and in recent years on biology, her original training, as well as feminism and animal studies. She refuses stereotypes of aging and still insists on riding horses in jumping competitions. If she falls, she gets back on. Her most recent book is as co-editor of Dreaming of Pegasus, Equine Imaginings, published by Victorina Press. Okay.
Thank you, Susan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, and thank you just for Spinifex Press for producing this and inviting us to speak. Inevitably, I've heard Consuelo, because she's my partner, sing that song Mujer many, many times. I didn't offer to join in singing with her because I didn't really want to inflict my singing voice on you all. But it's a hard act to follow. I, like several other people here, have been involved in the women's liberation movement in the 70s and can remember with great happiness the going out on the streets and the enthusiasm and zeal we all felt. It was very important to me at the time. We wanted to change the world. We were angry about so much. And in some ways, I think we said that in our chapter, we felt a degree of optimism that we still feel, despite the various setbacks. There have been some changes, and Sheila made allusion to that. There have been some changes, and there's a rebirth of feminist activism. But at the same time, I also feel an ongoing sense of despair, and currently, of course, that involves Afghanistan. At the time, in the 70s, I was doing a PhD in science, and I didn't only meet hostility about my feminism from colleagues, I also met hostility about me being a scientist from other women in the women's movement. So it wasn't a straightforward path. But yes, I was involved in setting up academic women's studies in this country and grew increasingly dismayed at how it was taken over by gender studies. That may have a place, but what's happened is that it's lost the original political impetus for women's studies, for feminist activism. And I think in many ways, Consuelo and I have had quite different paths. She was, as you said, Susan, a political prisoner in Pinochet's Chile. She was tortured for being a lesbian. I had a much easier path in the 1970s. I was in one of the most radical cities in England, Brighton, and it was very easy to come out as a lesbian and a feminist then. And I think it's quite an easy path, if you like, in Britain, for all that it's got many faults and currently a very right-wing government. But it was an easier path than Consuelo had. I think she had a very different and difficult trajectory in Chile. But fate brought us together, and we are still active in different ways, perhaps not as active as Sheila Jeffreys in the current women's movement. I mostly do activism around animal rights and environmental issues now, but certainly we're not dead yet. We continue to ride and do various things to challenge the stereotypes, and I hope we'll go on doing that for a very long time. We are most definitely not dead yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And I've seen pictures of you, photos of you on your horse, and I met your horses one day. That was lovely. Alison Laurie is our next speaker. She's from Aotearoa, New Zealand, of mixed Maori and European heritage. She's speaking today from Denmark. Alison has been active in lesbian, gay and feminist politics since the 1960s. She's lived in the UK, Norway and Denmark, and was founder of New Zealand's first lesbian organisation, She, first lesbian magazine, Circle, and first lesbian radio program. She was a lecturer in women's studies at Victoria University of Wellington from the 1980s. And of course, everybody has many more things which you can find out about in the book. Alison, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thank you so much for doing this book. It was really, really needed because of all the things that have been happening recently. Yeah, and I'm very impressed by the collection and what everyone has written. And yeah, and I think the book is wonderful, and doing these launches and promoting the book is wonderful too. Yeah, and I'm very honoured that my article was accepted and included in the book, and especially with some of the people whose work I've taught and admired. Yes, so that was wonderful. Yeah, so yes, what else was I going to say? Yeah, well, the article was I wrote about my own activism because I thought that was one way that I could write about what women in my generation did, because it's being so changed and the history is being rewritten, and that's a worry. Yeah, and I hope that my chapter explains how the women of my generation in New Zealand worked to achieve liberation and and have better circumstances. And as I say, I was lucky because I had supportive parents, and women in my family all did paid work, and it was expected that you would be able to support yourself, not be dependent on men. Yeah, so that was good. And then and then in my time, I think it was good that we had a Labor government that provided free education and healthcare and things like that. So that was important. Yeah, and to have all those things. Yes, and I've written about that. Yeah, in what I've written there. And then moving around, I learned different things about what. Yes, and especially finding out about some of the lesbian organisations that existed. Although what we had in New Zealand was we had gatherings together, but we couldn't drink in the pub because women couldn't go to the pub, and there was all sorts of things like that. But we met privately, and that was all very good. But then I found out that these organisations were being developed. Yes, so so the first organisation that I encountered was MRG in London, when I went to London in 1964, because that's what you did at that time. You went overseas from New Zealand, and I learned a lot in London from the women there. Yes, and then I went to Denmark. I travelled around Europe, and then I ended up in Denmark, and I learned a lot there. And then I made some trips to the United States, and that was where a lot of these ideas were being developed, which were really important in terms of thinking about what we might achieve and liberation and so on. Yes, and then when I went back to New Zealand, I smuggled in, we drove overland, as you did at that time, through Afghanistan actually too, at that time, that was 1972. And I smuggled in a lot of the magazines that I'd got in America. And that was good. And then when we started Circle, the first lesbian magazine, we reprinted and copied some of these articles. So in New Zealand, everyone was reading some of these wonderful things and articles by a lot of the activists of the time. So we were not isolated in that sense. Yes, and I've included in that also that we participated in anti-racism and peace movement and things like that. So we were conscious of other things and supported other kinds of movements too. So that was all fine. But it's been very disappointing how things have changed. I thought it was very interesting reading. I'm very pleased that there's other work there by Prue Hyman, and who's done fantastic work in terms of feminist economics, and who actually took over the radio program after I dropped out and ran that for some years. And now, of course, that's all gone. It's become the queer, Quilted Bananas show run by trans supporters. Which is, like a lot of the things have happened like that. And also good that, articles by Lynda Birke, who was my boss at Women's Studies and wonderful supporter. Yeah, and Sandra Coney, who did marvelous things in New Zealand. Yeah, so that's all been very good. So I've been very interested in reading all the other articles. And yes, and Martha Shelley, who the statement that she made so early about in a society where men oppress women, to be lesbian is a sign of mental health. We wrote that up and we made stickers and we put it up in toilets, women's toilets and things everywhere. It was a very good slogan to promote. Yeah, so we got a lot of influences from there. Yes, but anyway, we did achieve a lot and go through various legal reforms and different things like that. And I think we achieved a lot. But then a lot of it started being undermined quite early. And with I ended up being the program director for Gender and Women's Studies at Victoria. And I'd started off as a lecturer in Women's Studies, being supported by Prue and by Lynda. Yes, and then Lynda went to Parliament and people resigned and left, and I ended up being the program director. Now, we changed the name to Gender and Women's Studies because other parts of the university were trying to start gender studies. So we thought, we'll just add that in, and we will put it in first because we want it to be sort of thought of as women's studies. And we were still successful in doing that. But yeah, but what was interesting was that we had a board of studies on which there were a lot of women. But actually, there's a lot of those women who are sort of undermining and trying to take over what we did and teaching courses, and then in the finish, assisting the university to close us down. So that was what happened. And we had tried to, we'd included the, structuralism and postmodernism theoretical stuff, which we were obliged to do, but we also included strong criticisms of that. So that our students were quite able to say, yes, well, I know about this, but it doesn't explain what I'm trying to explain. Yeah, but anyway, so that was all good, but it was a pity to see it all destroyed and gone. And I suppose what we didn't predict, we hadn't predicted that there would be a backlash or what form the backlash would take, which has happened. And so it's good now to see that there's young women and also some of us are still able to be not dead yet and to try and recover some of the things that we've lost. We certainly didn't expect that as lesbians, we didn't expect that men would take over and say that they were lesbians. So there'd always been men trying to, get into lesbian crowds and things like that, but we were very good at refusing them and telling them to go. But now this was a whole new movement and a whole lot of young women thinking that they're being, accepting by we accept diversity and rubbish like this, which is just a nonsense, so much of it, and so destructive, and rewriting history, which is a worry. And that's why it's very good to see Sheila Jeffreys, because Sheila's been wonderful in terms of documenting history, and we need to get the history written and not allow it to be changed and foolishness incorporated in it, and trying to say that, people like Joan of Arc were transgender. It's as if they want to get rid of women in the past completely. All the women who are successful were really men in women's bodies, and all the men who, and men were also women. So everybody was a man who did anything. That's sort of the sort of nonsense that they're trying to promote, and there are people who believe this nonsense. So that's been a backlash that's hard to fight against. What's been good in New Zealand is we've got a lesbian organisation, Lava, we revived Lesbian Action for Visibility in Aotearoa, and that's important, and that's doing things online, internet, and also doing things, trying to stop some of this mad legislation they're trying to put through. Like self-identification and all that sort of rubbish. And and then we've got FAL, Feminists Older Women's Liberation, and that's good. Our Old Chicks, and that's also writing submissions and writing things and doing things. I wish I could do more, but some of I went to a public, we had a sort of a demonstration outside the Women's Ministry about, about their support of some of the new legislation and things. And it was only a very minor kind of demonstration, but then some of these women some of them were sort of friends of ours, lesbians of our own age or younger. especially younger, were going past saying things like, "Hope your ideas die along with you, die soon." That was terrible. It was very frightening. They got very violent. So we've been, so lesbians have been excluded from things in New Zealand. Yeah, because trans have taken over and have the power.
Yeah.
Yes, and we have to work out how to stop that.
Yeah, I think lesbians are being excluded from all sorts of places. And in Australia, you know, the Coalition of Activist Lesbians is writing submissions to governments to stop that as well. So thank you for updating us on all of that. Okay. Elaine Hutton. So if you could unmute yourself while I introduce you. Thank you so much, Alison. Elaine Hutton is a founding member of Lesbian Rights Alliance, formed to challenge the disappearing of lesbian existence. So we continue on this theme. Elaine left Australia in 1973 for England, travelling to Morocco and Europe. In 1978, she wrote a thesis on Doris Lessing, and in the 1980s was a member of Only Women Press. She has worked in many areas of the community sector, and her favourite job ever was working for Pensioners Link in London with feisty, formidable old women. Okay, Elaine.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. When I was asked to contribute, I wasn't sure initially what to write about because there's so much from the 70s and 80s. So I decided I'd focus on two organisations I'd been involved in setting up. One, Rape Crisis in Newcastle on Tyne, and then Girls Project when I'd moved to London. I'll start with Rape Crisis. So I've just talked about them briefly. In spite of the very serious intent of a Rape Crisis Centre supporting women who'd been raped and were victims of male violence, my memories, oddly, of the development and setting up are extremely joyful. And I think it's probably because the early collective, we were all fairly new feminists, and a lot of us were just getting into lesbian relationships. So it was a very happy time. There were over 30 of us in what was then called the collective. We discussed strategies, went on TV to debate against men, and we were discovering how to work together. We also, and I think that's different from now, we socialized together, we minded each other's cats, we had writing groups, we went on Reclaim the Night marches, and we went to conferences together in a bus. And we were a very strong friendship group. There were downsides. The women's, the Rape Crisis Centre was also a women's centre. There used to be lesbian bops on Saturday night, and the Rape Crisis workers would get very annoyed at having to come in on Monday morning and throw away beer cans and empty ashtrays. So that created some tension, but I think it demonstrates how we worked in the early days before everything got professionalized, and we just made the best of meager funding and what we had to do things. The thing about it was, though, we supported each other, we challenged men on the streets and in public meetings, and eventually with all the other centres which started in the mid to late 70s, we managed to get our insights recognised and taken into mainstream society, the extent of pornography and child abuse and how all the aspects of male violence were uncovered by us, partly from theorising, but also from women who'd been attacked who came to talk to us. So yeah, very happy time. And Tyneside Rape Crisis Centre is still going. It's the longest running centre, 43 years old. And unfortunately, it has to say now it works with men to get funding, though I don't think it really does. Okay, that's enough about that. Now, girls projects and youth work. I focused on girls work, and that was a political term, had a political meaning, which women at the time knew. It meant reclaiming space and entitlement for young women in the youth service. Now, the youth service at the time was very well funded from the 60s on, all over the country by local councils, but it was boys' work. Boys had taken over. It was activities aimed at boys, and the girls were on the sidelines watching boys play pool and do active things. So what happened, predominant women youth workers who were predominantly lesbians drew attention to this and campaigned for better provision for girls. They also unearthed the history of work with girls and young women from the suffragette movement and showed how it all existed between the wars, but when the youth service became professionalised, it had all been wiped out. So come and gone. So as I called my chapter, activism comes in waves with intent. So I worked in one of the 12 girls projects at the height of lesbian feminist activism. And I deliberately wrote about this in some detail about Tower Hamlets Girls Project in my chapter, because I wanted to demonstrate how different things were then and what we've lost. And importantly, by preserving this knowledge, a reminder of what we actually achieved from scratch so that we may do it again. So a couple of days ago, those of you who are my Facebook friends will know this, I posted a series of photos on my Facebook page of various events that our project did around 1985 and things I write about, because I think the chapter comes to life more when you see the photos of actual photos of young women. The photos show young women canoeing, windsurfing, learning self-defense, climbing ropes, chopping wood at Oakland's Women's Holiday House, horse riding, being absorbed in carpentry, as well as dancing together at the social. We used to have a social for them at the end of every year, and that was always very well attended. And it was so important because all these things, if you like we got permission to be lesbians with the women's movement, one of our aims was giving girls permission to be together, to enjoy being together. And I think a lot of that's been taken away, and it's really important to bring it back. I also posted an image of a poster that was up in every youth centre in the heyday of girls' work. 3 girls cuddling each other and laughing, and the slogan, "It's really good being a girl." Nowadays, unfortunately, to paraphrase Posey Parker, we might have to say it's really good being an adolescent human female, because girls have been so wiped out. But what was interesting, when I posted that, a whole lot of women responded, and other women came out of the closet of having worked in girls' work. So I'm hoping, like, from writing this chapter, that we may start making connections and bring that kind of young women's work back into circulation. So I think that's one of the very important aspects of this book. But nowadays, so-called funded youth groups, and I know this from my work in Bristol with schools and what's happening, the only funded youth groups that exist, they're predominantly Stonewall endorsed GBT groups, I'm not going to say L, where lesbian is either a banned word or has a penis. But there is hope, and Lynn didn't have time to say this, but there's a terrific new project from the Lesbian Rights Alliance that Lynn and a group of young women put together called Positively Lesbian. It's a new website for young lesbians, and that will develop further. And and there's a plan to have a young lesbian group, and they've got a woman who will run it, a young lesbian. So I'll finish here. I'll just say, after lockdown, the Lesbian History Group is thriving again. We're determined to rescue our history and ensure it isn't lost. And I'd just like to finish by summing up what I said at the end of my chapter. I said, when we recount our past achievements to young women, they say, and they've said this often, but you had it all then, it's different now. We point out that we didn't have it all. We made it happen by hard work and joyous collective endeavour. It isn't surprising that the first women to see the dangers of trans ideology were lesbian feminists who came together from the women's liberation movement, and that we've been vigilant, active and influential in opposing it. We need to remind ourselves of what was possible in order to make it possible again. And I'm hoping this terrific book will go some way in doing that. And I'd just like to end by saying hello to some of my friends who I can see, Kathy, Sue, Lavender, Bodil, etc. It's great seeing you all. And thank you so much, Renata and Susan, for doing this book. I think it's so important. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. So our final speaker is Lynda Bellos, OBE. She is a British businesswoman, radical feminist and lesbian rights activist. In 1981, she was the first Black woman to join the Spare Rib Collective, and in 1985 was elected as a Labor councillor to the Lambeth Borough Council. She is a person of African, Eastern European and Jewish heritage who has worked for decades on issues of social class, minority and majority ethnic identity, disability, sexual identity and religion. I'm glad that you were able to get in, Lynda. Thank you. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I care passionately about history, the history of women, the history of Black people, and the book was really the ideal thing that we should do, because lots of young people don't know. My granddaughters don't know about the struggles that we and many other women have engaged in. I do think that the notion of race has been one that I have been challenged with. I started thinking about the notion of race when I started thinking about the notion of gender. And I cannot believe that people who consider themselves learned could accept that this man-made thing was real, and indeed that a man putting on his mother's clothing somehow is equal to women. So I wrote not very much, and I do have a problem with my short-term memory, and so I didn't write very much. But I want to share with you my thoughts about thinking about race. I think that race is equivalent to gender, man-made, and rightly, the feminists who are white do try to address racism, and I think racism is real, by the way. It's races that are not, and I think we should be talking about race and gender as man-made notions. I think it's vital to unpick the rubbish that is said that men can do. The idea that a man puts on his mother's clothes and somehow he's a woman is just nonsense. And in a similar way, we have views, we've created views about Black people. Melanin is not a determinant of one's ability to be rational, to think, and yet men have made it so. So I'd like us to, and I wrote about racism because it's the notion of it is central to my experience of being in Britain, the women's liberation movement. I did experience, not conscious, hateful racism, but just unthinking racism that didn't consider the joins, as it were, with the ideology of gender and the ideology of race. And I invite you all to consider those things, because I want half the human race, that are girls and women, to be free of oppression. And in a similar way, and I'm sure you want to see the end of racism. I think we do it in our development. If we are, I hope, to rebuild a women's liberation movement, it needs to be inclusive of all women. And that means we're going to have a bit of a fight with those Black women who think that gender is real, and that there are these trans people, trans women are real women. It's a barrier to what we have achieved. And I'm so grateful for the book. I think it's really vital that there is a book that reflects the struggles, even if as I'm implying, perhaps it, from my point of view, doesn't go as far as I would have wished it to go. However, I am so glad it's there, and I'm so glad you sisters are here. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Lynda. Sorry, I had to unmute myself because our dog is sitting next to me and was starting to whimper. She was at the vet all day today, so she has good reason. What's that?
Can we see her?
Maybe a bit later, after we finish. Okay, so I noticed that a number of other contributors in the audience today: Diane Bell, Denise Thompson, Cora Valdez Fabros, Jean Taylor, Cheryl Adam, and Lavender. Now, I'm not sure whether you've all been to all three launches, but I know several of you have, and at least two. Do any of you want to say anything just in response to what you've been hearing this evening? So, Di Bell, Denise Thompson, Corazon Fabros, Jean Taylor, Cheryl Adam, Lavender, calling on you if you want to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Jean Taylor speaking from Wurundjeri Wurrung country in Bullabek Naam in Melbourne, Australia. It's very encouraging to hear, again, radical lesbian feminists from around the world talking about our experiences, which are all very similar in as much as that we worked really hard through the 70s and 80s and 90s, and now we find ourselves under siege. We've continued on very much here in Australia as much as possible, but we have been underground for the last 20 years, still doing our work, still working away, because we didn't want to lose that important radical lesbian feminist community. So we've still been meeting. It's an irony that the only thing that stopped us meeting has been the pandemic. So we haven't been stopped by anybody else or any, we've managed to maintain our secrecy and be underground. But the pandemic, unfortunately, has forced us to cancel a couple of our very important regular residential gatherings. So just to say thank you very much again. It's been wonderful. And I'm very grateful for Zooms that we can see each other like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Does anybody else want to say something for just a couple of minutes? We're actually running out of time.
I wouldn't mind if the space.
Okay, Lavender.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, what I want to say is, you know, in the 70s and 80s, Britain had Spare Rib, New Zealand had Broadsheet. I mean, these were middle of the road feminist publications. You know, there were the radical ones too, like Trouble and Strife and Gossip and so on. But they've all pretty well disappeared. I'm just wondering, is it time for us, whether we go just digital or hard copy, to have a generalist kind of feminist publication? Or, ... I guess your thinking's going where mine is, are we going to leave ourselves open for the trans activists to come in and take it over? But, maybe we all...
No.
That was a loud no from Renata.
I don't want the trans activists there. What I'm saying is, I think there's a need for a generalist kind of feminist thing. And by the way, my T-shirt says, "The future is feminist," which we did for International Women's Day this year. And you'd be surprised the number of young women who I thought were queer or just nothing came up and wanted to buy one. So there is an interest there, as Sheila and Lynda and so on have pointed out. But, you know, do we have a need, or can we make a possibility to have some kind of generalist?
Well, I think to some extent, just as we had to do it for ourselves, the women need to do it for themselves as well. The next generation, the younger women actually will, and some have started to do things. Of course, they're going to do it differently. And they're, you know, I don't, it's difficult to say, can we do something? Because that's putting it out there for somebody else. So we either do it ourselves, or we other younger women do it for themselves, I think.
But I wasn't thinking specifically for the younger women, intergenerational.
No, I know, but cross-generational. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Okay. Some of us did try a couple of years ago in England, and I, for one, walked away because the young people, the young women, hadn't grasped the notion of kind of process of how you do things. And I think there is a feminist way of doing things that we should share, that we fought for, and it was not the way that men do things. And the young women were just doing it as they'd learnt it from university or wherever, which is very much the men's way of doing things. And I'm still very much committed to a feminist process. And I think that if we build something new, it has to be underpinned by a feminist process, an anti-racist feminist process, but a feminist process.
True, true. Thank you for your time on that.
Di, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, hi, it's Diane Bell here from Canberra, from Ngunnawal country. We're in lockdown because of COVID. I'm allowed out for an hour each day, which I cherish, but it's damn cold here at the moment. I'm a recidivist. I've been to the 3 launches that you've had so far. And it's been really interesting listening to each regional cluster and hearing the commonalities that are coming out. I mean, our frustration, our shared histories, our shared concerns, and the brick walls that we're running into, and the little openings that we're finding, those little gaps that are there. The light does come through, as we can hear people teasing it out. But regional grouping has had its own kind of cultural and political inflection to it, which to me has been very interesting. And thanks, Sheila, for kind of teasing out some of those commonalities and differences. Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is a there's a collective wisdom in the book, much to Renata and Sue for pulling that out of us all and putting it together and giving it an introduction so it does sit together as a body of work. And I think there is some merit in trying to think what is it that keeps us together, but the things that also can tear us apart. So thanks very much for that really clear statement about the relationship of gender and race and class as man-made categories. I think it's a great starting point. So thank you to all of you. And as I say, it's been terrific hearing the different regions, seeing the commonalities, frustrations, but also thinking about how we might move forward. Can't hear you, Sue.
Yeah. Before we finish up with some thanks and stuff, next week, we are hoping to have a Zoom session on Afghanistan and the anthology September 11, 2001, Feminist Perspectives. which Bronwyn Winter and I edited and was published in 2002. It's not totally sorted yet, but likely speakers at this stage are Kalpana Sharma from India, Farida Akhtar from Bangladesh, Evelyn Akkad from Lebanon, who's currently in Paris, Urvashi Butalia from India, and maybe a speaker from RAWA, the Revolutionary Association of Women of Afghanistan. So it's not sorted yet. If you haven't signed up to our newsletter, please do so that you'll see it, or keep it in touch on social media. So now I'm going to pass over to Renata again.
Yes, thank you very much, Sue, for mentioning this. I mean, I actually find it quite hard. This has actually really cheered me up, this webinar. This has cheered me up because the last few days have just been really depressing. Seeing the news out of Afghanistan, and you can only just dread to think what's going to happen to these poor women and children. And we can only hope that enough of them survive, that they can start an underground movement. But, you know, Western men, from Biden to Morrison to Johnson to all of them, put them in charge and look what they come up with. I mean, it is a disgrace. And I do actually wonder, I was going to, before this, I said to Susan, I said, do you think, you know, if whatever all the women are writing in this book, if our ideas had actually lived on to be put into practice, and some of them have, but not enough, I think we would really be living in a different, in a better world. And it is so, it is actually depressing to see that, I mean, patriarchy really has still such a stronghold. Now, I'm not naive to know that, you know, you can't just do away 6,000 years of patriarchal rule in 60 years. I know that you can't. And we achieved many things, and I really don't want to put all the fantastic things that women said in Not Dead Yet, I don't want to put that down. But it really has been a few horrible days, and it is probably, well, not probably, it is not going to be over at all. Thinking that all, as we speak, you know, Australia managed to evacuate 26 people yesterday, and I don't think any of them were women, or they were not mentioned. It is a total, utter disgrace. It really is. But okay, I'm supposed to do thank yous. Well, there's Susan and me, and it's 30 years since we have started Spinifex, and we can finish each other's sentences and write introductions together that actually hold together, which is fantastic. Now we've done that. But behind us and next to us is a team. It's the Spinifex team. And without all these wonderful women, we could not do what we do. So I want to thank Marilyn Damiano, our office manager, who's been with us over 20 years, ably assisted by Sharon Murphy, our warehouse manager. Then we move to the actual editing, and here I really want to thank big thanks to Pauline Hopkins, who, especially on Not Dead Yet, has been fantastic together with Susan and me to edit the pieces, which was actually very joyful. Because we were so delighted with all the content. So we didn't really have to edit a great deal, but it was more like keeping 56 people in check. And have you written your bio note? No, it's not supposed to be 500 words. It's actually supposed to be 150 words and things like that. So thank you, Pauline, for all your work. Then, of course, there's Caitlin Roper, who was here at the beginning. Not sure if she's still here. Caitlin is our social media manager, who's also doing fantastic research work herself on sex dolls. You might have seen already some of her stuff, some of the Brave New World that's coming to women and girls. So thank you, Caitlin, for always being there, even in the middle of the night. And then, of course, Rachel McDermott, our never know your title, our promotions manager. And without Rachel, we actually also couldn't exist, because Rachel tells us how to put videos up and stuff like that. So with all of you, without all of you, we could not do what we do. So thank you to all of you. And of course, without the contributors, 56 of you of Not Dead Yet, we could not have done this fantastic book. And those of you who have read the introduction, at the end of the introduction, she say, if you are not in this book and you would like to actually post us an essay about, you know, your contribution in the women's liberation movement, please do so. And we have already 2 contributions, and they have now been put up on a blog which is connected to the Not Dead Yet website. And one of them is just, I really wish we would have been able to put it in the book. It's about violence against women. It's really good. It's really moving. It's really to the point. So I guess we will get more essays, and they will all go up on the blog. But I don't think there's going to be a second volume of Not Dead Yet, because I think if we did a second volume of Not Dead Yet, we might be dead. And we're not going to do this. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming, especially all the Australians who came. Oh, now we see a cat, Lavender's cat. That's very good. And maybe this is the time to get our Nala up, poor old thing who was the whole day at the vet and had to be sedated and all of this, and her beautiful tail doesn't look so beautiful anymore.
We need Consuelo to sing. Nala likes to sing.
I also have to really, you know, give a big shout out to Consuelo, because Consuelo is not well. Consuelo is undergoing very horrible chemotherapy for ovarian cancer, and has been doing for a couple of years. And we're all, you know, really cheering for Consuelo, and that's why you recorded this song, in case you weren't actually able to be here. Now you were here, you actually look really well. I'm always surprised how you can withstand all this stuff going into your body. So we're all cheering for you and your press, and so they're fantastic women in this book, all of you. So thank you, Sheila and Lynn and Elaine and God, Lynda and the other Lynda, and here is Nala.
Here is Nala.
Who is not singing. Normally she would sing, but she has been sedated, as I said, and she probably wants more dinner as well. So
yeah, she got 2/3 of dinner earlier instead of all of it. The other thing is we have a newsletter and social media, and do watch our launches on YouTube, or if you know people who missed the launch and want to see one or more of them, you can reach all of these via our website. Now I'm just quickly going to share the screen here. Hang on, where is it?
Susan, before you do that, let me just say that our next 2 publications are actually on the trans issue. Our next publication is called Detransition Beyond, Before and After. It's by Max.
Sorry.
And then after that, we have the great honor and pleasure of publishing Janice Raymond's first book ever since she wrote The Transsexual Empire on this topic. So that will come out in October, and that will of course give us a lot of brownie points and a lot of more hate, because, you know, we are now known as the TERF press in Australia, and well, we live up to this title, and I hope you will all read these books, and they're very good and they're very important. And like all of you, I hope that we will actually see the day when sanity has returned. That's all I want to say. So thank you to all.
So there are the ordering details. Most of you probably already know this, but just in case.